think one lesson that running has taught me is that actually time and consistent effort produces results, and that there isn't a silver bullet. There's no shortcuts. And that's just not very cool. I don't think people necessarily want to hear that. There's no bit of kit you're going to buy. There's no supplement you're going to take. Nothing's going to bypass hard work and consistency and time.
Welcome back to the Run of Life podcast. Jenny, Gary, great to be back with you for another week. Jenny, first things first, how did you get on Saturday night?
Well, Saturday night was a bit wet and wild. It was a lovely day to start with, and then as soon as 6:25 rolled around, the heavens opened and the wind picked up. So it was a bit of a rough day out there for me. I half did what my direction from the coach was to commit to the front group. So I got halfway there and decided to bottle it and run a little bit solo for half the race, which kind of made me lose my kick at the end. So it wasn't the best day, but it's given me a lot of motivation now for the rest of the season and the bigger races that are coming up. Hey, but a road PB, right? So you've got to be happy with that somewhere. Yeah, definitely. Road PB. So that's, you can never knock a PB. And I was saying it to you guys before we came on here. This time last year, I was running about 45 seconds slower than that. So it's definitely big steps in the right direction. Nice. And what are you looking at now? What's the next thing for you? I will be making an appearance at the National Road Relays at the beginning of April. Awesome. So yeah. Pontypridd Rodents is taking a women's team this year, so that'll be exciting. And I haven't run there since I actually was running for Cardiff and we won. So hopefully we can recreate some sort of magic. Oh, yeah. I've heard a lot of good things about that event. Can't wait to hear your review of it.
Jenny, just give us the date and time and place exactly of that event, just so people can follow.
In Sutton Park in Birmingham on the 6th of April, and it's pretty much starts at about 11, I think, and rolls all through the afternoon as the men have 12 stages to complete. So it's a really fantastic event. I did it first as an under 15 when I was a kid. So I've done it throughout my whole kind of career as an athlete. So it'd be fun to go back.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But enough about me. Gary, what have you been up to?
First of all, just to finish on you, I was watching the live stream, Jenny, and it looked wet and horrible at your event. And what you want to be doing is taking a leaf out of my book, because the sporting highlight for me was a bit of indoor Zwift racing on my Watt bike in the garage. Ooh, hello. I didn't get wet. I wasn't out there in the driving rain in Leicestershire, but more's the pity.
Gary, does the Watt bike count as one of your 7 bikes, or is that the 8?
Actually, unbelievably, it doesn't. I realise I now have to add that in, because arguably it's probably one of the most expensive as well. So I did that. That was Sunday morning. I had a crazy weekend doing stuff with the kids, so I sort of crammed in a criterium on the Watt bike on Sunday morning, which is good. It's a great way of giving me a kind of massive cardio hit, because I can't run at pace at the moment. But Friday night I was on the track, did a sort of mini interval session. I'd say the work intervals were slightly slower than my old goal marathon pace, so it's all relative, but that was good fun. That's nice. I like being on the track under the floodlights up at Aldershot on a Friday with my son was running on the track with me, so that was brilliant. That was really good. But Ed, you've been doing some exciting stuff. What did you get up to over the weekend on Sunday morning?
Sunday morning, yeah, Kingston breakfast run, 16 miles, which is an excellently random distance, but 2 laps around Kingston and Hampton Court. It went quite well. I'm putting it down as quite a sort of long effort, which you can't really replicate in training, rather than like a sparkling race. But currently I'm down as first in the results.
So explain this currently thing, because Jenny and I claim it, move on. You came first. I mean, we both want the victory. Why are you saying currently? What's going on?
So it's kind of difficult when you're running so usually when you run a race, if you cross the line, because there's a tape and fireworks and things like that. But This event is a bit of a unique one because there are 3 different distances at the same time. So it's an 8 mile, a 16 mile, a 20 mile. So you never quite know who's running what race while you're running it. And so you don't know who's in ahead of you and whether they're running further than you or less far or... So yeah, and there was a little bit of confusion about my results. I was initially listed in the 8 mile rather than the 16 mile. So I'm just a little dubious about whether there might be other people out there that maybe passed me on the second lap that might go into the results. But for now, let's claim it. First place. You don't finish first very often, do you? So I'm pretty pleased with that as an effort for my Sunday morning.
Yeah, you should be. And the conditions were pretty horrible, weren't they, at times? And that's a significant improvement on, I think, your last result. And maybe above all, you got a free mug into the deal.
Got a free mug. Yes. What a great memento. Gone are the medals, got T-shirts, a mug that I can drink my coffee out of every day and remember the Kingston Breakfast Run. It's got a beautiful picture of Kingston Bridge on it as well. So... yeah, very cool. Lovely. Very cool. Very happy with that.
Yeah.
It's a victory mug then, is it? You'll always remember that first place.
That's it. Pride of place. Yeah.
No. Congratulations, mate. Well done.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you very much. So, on to the episode for this week. And this week, it's quite a long one, actually. So, buckle in, but a really deep and great conversation with someone who has made his business actually out of telling stories about the kind of intersection of life and running. So, a perfect fit for this podcast. He is the editor and publisher of Like the Wind. Welcome to the podcast, Simon Freeman.
The crazy thing is, to get to issue 40, you have to produce issue 1. There's no way around that. You can't get to where we are, which I'm very proud of. I think it's a fabulous product now, but you don't get there without doing issue 1, and probably by some law of nature, issue 1 has to be absolute rubbish. My passion exists at this intersection of storytelling and running. You don't need to be running 100-mile weeks, smashing out sub 3-hour marathons, running 100-mile trail races to be a good storyteller or to be in love with storytelling. If you fall out of love with running and that's your only connection to running, then it's a problem, because then there's a void. Whereas for me, I was like, well, I can actually become a better editor, a better writer. So I'm Simon Freeman. I think I should start with my running. As a runner, I sort of started late, and I would say I got quickly obsessed. Is probably an accurate description. Got obsessed with trying to run a faster marathon, and 10 years ago launched a magazine called Like the Wind with my wife, actually alongside another business that we recently exited. My running's been on an interesting journey through obsession into excuse making, into the trough of despair, and more recently, I'm sort of rediscovering a love of, I would say, structured training. That's what's been missing. But yeah, basically love working and I'd say living at the intersection of storytelling and running is probably what you need to know about me.
Wow, that's a fantastic intro. And I'm looking forward to exploring some of that journey that you just highlighted there. What makes you come alive?
So I'll be honest and say that I had prepped for this question, having listened to a number of episodes. I kind of knew this was coming. And I was trying to narrow it down to one thing and then I couldn't. So I'm not going to. I'm going to say, starting with running, what makes me come alive is, in all honesty, it's road marathons. I'm just obsessed with road marathons. I just think they're fantastic. Like, it used to be participating. It will be participating again. Very much enjoy watching them. I mean, I will happily sit for 2.5, 3 hours and watch the live stream of a road race. Absolutely love it. I also have to say what makes me come alive from a running perspective is training. I love training, especially with other people. So I'm saying that despite having kind of fallen off the training bandwagon in recent years, but I do really enjoy it. Professionally, I sort of alluded to this, but it's finding great stories, working with passionate people, writers, colleagues, illustrators. And this happens reasonably regularly, getting feedback from somebody that's just discovered the magazine. It just absolutely fires me up. I love that. It's the greatest feeling. And then personally, I love sharing a meal with people. It's just for me, it's just the best thing, whether I'm sort of cooking or going out for dinner or whatever. I just think it's the most convivial way to spend time. So probably the thread there is people. I'm obviously somebody that gets a lot of energy from people.
Oh, I love that. And I particularly love your answer about road marathons, because sometimes I sit here and people tell me about how they love running up hills and in the mud and over dales. And that is also has its appeal. But as a runner, that's my sweet spot as well. You know, give me a flat road and some carbon plated shoes and I'm pretty happy. Like, you know, that makes me come alive. But I feel like that's sometimes a controversial and unpopular opinion.
Yes.
Let's jump into your running then to start off with. And what we try and explore in this podcast, kind of at the center of it, is, you know, what has running taught us that we can apply to our lives, or equally, what has our lives taught us that applies to our running? So if there's one thing that you could put your finger on, what one thing have you learned from running that you apply to life?
I think this is a little unpalatable, as unpalatable for me as I imagine for most people. But I think one lesson that running has taught me is that actually time and consistent effort produces results, and that there isn't a silver bullet. There's no shortcuts, and that's just not very cool. I don't think people necessarily want to hear that. And you know, we've all done it as runners. You know, you get up and you think, I've got to do that run, whatever it is. It's in my training program, and it's wet and it's cold, and I don't feel like I want to do it. And the problem is that giving into that is, you know, you're not putting money in the bank, and that's become as apparent through the two businesses that I've set up with my wife as it is for running, and it was an unpalatable truth for me. I mean, I sort of mentioned that I went through this point in my life where I'm not going to say I gave up on running, but I just took my foot off the gas. And the net result was I became a very much worse runner. And now I'm sort of trying to dig myself out of that hole. But there's no bit of kit you're going to buy. There's no supplement you're going to take. There's there's nothing's going to bypass hard work and consistency and time. It's just that's. And to be honest, when I started running, and I think if you asked people that were close to me when I started running, you know, nearly 20 years ago, including my family, my, you know, parents and people like that, they would say, yeah, it was a surprise because I'd never really consistently applied myself to anything to get past mediocrity. And I'm a mediocre runner. I mean, at my absolute best, I was not a particularly good runner, but good for the sort of, you know, situation I was in, I guess. So we'll probably get on to talking about my dad, but my dad was this sort of colossus in my life as I was growing up. And I think he was always mildly disappointed because I'd never really stuck at something long enough to be, you know, better than below average. And running was the one thing that I was like, okay, this is, I'm going to say this is stuck. It almost wasn't that I stuck with it. It's that it stuck to me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I don't get to take credit for it, but yeah. That's what I would say I've learned from running.
And why do you think that running stuck to you, particularly as you love running on the road? Because I'm just going to pick up what Ed talked about. There's almost the this kind of like, if you're out running in the hills and on in incredible countryside, it's almost this alibi, like, and that's why I love running and it's okay. When you said, I love road marathons, it was almost slightly apologetic, but it has absolutely stuck with you, right? What is it? Do you know what it is that made it just relentlessly appealing, just to pound, not just to pound the tarmac, but that form of running?
Well, so this goes back to, consistency and time. I think that when I discovered running, I was very lucky that. So the short history, I don't know whether we spend any time on this, but the short history is that I was just about to turn 30, and I was a pack-a-day smoker, and I was very overweight. I ate terribly. I did zero exercise, like no exercise. And I was I didn't realize, I wouldn't have called it this at the time, but I realize now I was sort of not in a great way from a mental health perspective. I was sort of in debt, stressed out, depressed. All of I didn't label it as such, but I was not in a great mental shape. And I went out with work colleagues on Christmas Eve. We finished half day on a Christmas Eve, and we went out and got absolutely hammered, which was kind of really normal in that situation, work situation. And I distinctly remember, I kind of made a pilgrimage back there, but I distinctly remember going into a newsagent's right by Leicester Square tube station and buying 2 packs of cigarettes. And when I woke up the next morning on Christmas Day, I had no cigarettes. So I'd, somehow gone through 40 cigarettes in a night.
Yep.
And I thought, this is absolutely... So I was 29, I was going to turn 30 in March, and I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. Like, I cannot walk up a flight of stairs without getting out of breath. And I've got to do something right now, in this instant, not next week, like right now. And the only thing I could think of was just to sort of make this announcement to myself that I was going to stop smoking in the bathroom mirror. I've never smoked anything since. That was it. I was done from that second. And again, lots of friends at the time were like, yeah, of course you will. But I never touched another, And then luckily, one of my best friends from university had gone through a similar sort of, moment of reflection and self-awareness, and he'd started running. And then my girlfriend at the time, her best friend's husband was a marathon runner. So I met all these people who said, or I knew these people who said, if you do this, that will be the result. And the joy of it was that it was really, really, really simple. Like, it took no thinking. It was, if you go out and run round the block twice a week, you will start to lose a bit of weight. You'll start to feel better. You'll mentally and physically, you'll improve. And then if you make it twice round the block, or you add in another run, so you do it 3 times a week, the progress will just continue. It's so straightforward that even I could understand it. And I think I just loved the fact that you understood what needed to happen to make progress. There was no magic. And then if you did it, you made progress. And I often describe it as sort of, the state that I was in, there was so much kind of headroom. There's so much potential for growth. It didn't take very much. Quit smoking, go running, twice a week for a mile and a half. And suddenly I was like, oh, wow, I've lost half a stone, like seemingly by magic. And I don't feel quite as depressed. And, so that was probably why it stuck with me, because
there's just a fairness to that, isn't there? It's just fair. The more you put in, the more. And just in case people are listening, you sort of whetted their appetite talking about, let's be honest a little bit, how fast you were. You ended up running a 2-hour 37 marathon, Simon, which is not an inconsiderable achievement. Where was that? When was that?
That was in London in 2013. I was London home marathon. I didn't particularly want to run London. I didn't think that London was the race that I was going to, necessarily run my PB at, but it was really cheap, and I could get into the championship start, which, by the way, is a gift. Yeah. If you can get into the championships, it is a gift. It's like that old phrase, money begets money. If you get to I don't know what the qualifying time is now, but for me at the time it was
2:40.
2:40. Is it 2:40 now? Oh, inflation.
It's 2:40 now.
2:45
may
back
or
in
may
my
not
day.
Have that like ingrained in my mind because that's the goal for April. But anyway,
right, now we're getting somewhere. Well, so it was 2:45. But I used to think to myself, if you can run the 2:45 and get into the championship start, or the 2:40 now, it's basically a 3 minute. In my opinion, it's a 3 minute gift, because it's just such a 2:37:07 in London. Always unhappy with that time. I'll never be happy.
And as you went on that journey, though, to get there, how would you say, you talked about like the physical transformation, was there an inner transformation going on as well? Because also that was around about the time when maybe the magazine was germinating in your mind, right, as well. I don't know if it's right to pull those two things together. First of all, what was going on in the inner world as you were getting fitter in the outer world?
Well, it wasn't on purpose, but I think that, and again, this is like, when you're living this journey, you don't necessarily see the changes because they're happening at a micro level on a day-by-day basis. But I think people in my life who'd known me, before I quit smoking and started running, would say that I was not someone that's stuck at things. And so the inner change was like, I remember having a session in my training diary, and it snowed in London. It was one of those winds, and I can't remember what year it was now, but it was one of those years where the snow came down heavily, and where we lived, all the pavements were covered in snow. There was no, like, I live in Switzerland now, and when it snows here, everything just kicks into action and life carries on, and all the pavements are cleared and the roads are cleared. It's phenomenal. But in London, everything just ground to a halt. And I worked out that the only place where they had cleared the snow was the high street, and I had a 20-mile run to do, and I ran 21-mile reps, 20 single-mile reps up and down the only snow-ploughed bit of road in this area of North London. And a couple of people that knew me from back in the day were like, "What on earth?"
Do you know, one of the ways that I'll know that this podcast is reaching the right people is most people listening to this will go, "Yeah, fair enough."
Yeah, exactly. But this is the thing about not coming from a running background, right? I mean, I was 30, so I'm sort of walking around, kind of giving myself a pat on the back. Lots of runners are like, yeah,
yep.
And that's a sobering moment when you realise, okay, not that big a deal. But yeah, that was probably the inner change, was just becoming a bit more determined. Honestly, was the main thing.
And is that inner determination? Is it kind of linked to the launch of the magazine? Where was that sort of germinating in your mind? Because that's been you're about to celebrate your 10-year anniversary with Light the Wind.
10-year anniversary. Yeah.
And there is a theme of consistency here. What did it unlock for you, that inner journey that we've all now benefited from?
Well, I will give credit where credit's due. The magazine and the other business that I'd co-founded, neither of them would have existed without my wife Julie, because she's many things: incredibly creative, very determined, a bit of a risk taker where I was probably more cautious. But what happened was that Julie and I went to Chamonix sort of on a bit of a It was supposedly a honeymoon. Basically, we'd got married, didn't have any money, and we decided that we would go to Chamonix and run the UTMB route over 3 days as a sort of a bit of a honeymoon. And we thought, we'll have a proper honeymoon in due course. I don't think we still haven't, but there you go. And one of the things where we were in Chamonix, getting ready to leave, we picked up some magazines in a French magazine shop about climbing and cycling, and we were like, that sort of magazine doesn't really exist in running. There's lots of magazines in the running world, but that sort of long form storytelling journal, high quality, heavyweight coffee table publication doesn't exist. And we'd already, about a year before, launched our first business together. And at some point, it's lost in the mists of storytelling. At some point, we were like, why don't we try and make this magazine that we want to read? I mean, how hard can it be? And we came back from that trip it was late September. We came back, figured, just literally Googled, how do you make a magazine? Started emailing people to get stories, and we launched the first issue the following February. So 6 months later, mainly because we were terrified that somebody else was trying to do the same thing at the same time, which now 10 years later, no one else has tried to do the same thing. So either... Oh,
that's because you've claimed the space so brilliantly. That's
maybe. Or maybe it's because it's such a stupid idea that no one else should do it.
But there's we were talking just before we started recording about kind of the nature of being able to stick around and the consistency there. And I do want to come back to that. But I do also want to make the point that I remember that first issue coming out, the first 2, 3, 4 issues. And it was, when's the next one? This is so precious. And you made such an incredible product from nowhere. Like I assumed that you knew how to make a magazine or you had some kind of background. But number one arrives on the doormat and it's this thing that is just a treasure. It's beautiful and it smells amazing and it's well designed and there's no adverts in it, et cetera, et cetera. And the content itself is not telling me how to run, Couch to 5K. It's telling me about people's lives and emotional journeys and inspirations and whys. And I suppose the question is, how did you manage to go from zero to such an incredible product in 6 months or 8 months or whatever it was?
Well, I mean, I thank you. Also, issue 1 was terrible. Really bad. Really bad. And I can say that because there hasn't been any available for about 8 years. So no one can buy it.
We can't go back and check.
So there you go. But again, we were sort of very lucky because we had people that were prepared to help us. I'll shout out to a guy called Bruce Sandell, who at the time was the managing director of the cycling magazine Rouleur. And he heard about what we were doing. He heard about what we were doing and he invited us down and it felt like we were going to see the Pope. And we went down to their offices and walked in. And as you can imagine, the offices of Rouleur were just beautiful and had this sort of, coffee machine that cost as much as a family car and all this sort of stuff.
Everything made of carbon fibre. Yeah, I've got no doubt.
Exactly. And Julie and I, honestly, we thought we hadn't got issue 1 out. It didn't exist. We'd created a crap website and a Facebook page, and we were trying to pre-sell issue copies so that our risk wasn't too great. So it didn't exist. And we went down, and as we were going down to see Bruce, I said to Julie, I think they're about to tell us that they're launching a running magazine and they're just going to crush our dreams. And we went in and sat down in their boardroom, and Bruce brought us a coffee and he said, how can I help you guys?
Brilliant.
Amazing. And I was like,
absolutely brilliant.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Hang on. But so we had people that helped us. And honestly, Julie will tell this story better than I will. But I remember Julie laying out text and printing it out on an inkjet printer, and me looking at it and saying to her, "What are you doing?" And she was like, "I'm trying to work out what point size we need to use for the text in the magazine." And I was like, "Okay." Well, it was absolute amateur hour. I mean, honestly, that level of nonsense. But
that's incredible.
Once the crazy thing is, to get to issue 40, you have to produce issue 1. There's no way around that. You can't get to where we are, which I'm very proud of. I think it's a fabulous product now, but you don't get there without doing issue 1. And probably by some law of nature, issue 1 has to be absolute rubbish. And it's okay. You just got to not kind of mind and just produce issue 2, and off you go.
It clearly didn't look rubbish to Ed, and it's funny, isn't it? Because these things seem to arrive like they kind of arrive in your world like fully formed, and you think, oh, these guys know exactly what they're doing, and then you hear a story like that, which I find massively encouraging, and I'm also massively encouraged by the kindness of Bruce Sandell at Rouleau, which is also a great magazine. That
hat tip to Bruce.
Oh yeah, just like when you're looking for faith in human beings, hearing things like that is quite nice. You mentioned Julie as well, by the way, and in the run-up to the recording, you were very kind of open and vulnerable with us about that you guys have had some infertility challenges in your lives, and that must have been, I mean, lots and lots of things going on in your lives, and that must have also been really quite tough for you as a couple. How did you navigate that particular roller coaster?
Well, roller coaster is a great analogy. I think, honestly, for the period that we were going through it, it was a matter of just strapping in and holding on. I mean, I felt very much, I mean, as a counterpoint to what we discussed about running, it's like you can't do anything. There's no, or you try and do everything, but none of it works. It's incredibly complicated and heartbreaking. And I think what I've discovered about myself is that I like to work problems, whether that's a personal issue or, a work issue. I'm one of those people that, like, if I can figure out a plan, I just want to kind of keep going at it and try and, elicit the result. And the problem with the IVF is, I mean, the diagnosis was unexplained infertility. I mean, what do you do with that? It's just, it's not, you're like, okay. And there's lots of, there's tons of advice, very well-meaning advice, sometimes from people that aren't, medical professionals, sometimes from people that are. And I think, I mean, I guess part of the reason I've never talked about this, by the way, in a public forum. I obviously talked about it with friends, but I think that as a counterpoint to running, which, as we discussed, within reason, you follow the plan. You can figure out the plan. You follow the plan. You deal with the wrinkles. You deal with the sort of inevitable small setbacks and what have you. But you know that if you do the work and you sleep well and you eat well and you do the strengthening addition or whatever, you will come closer to your goal. There's no guarantee, but you will move towards your goal. Fertility is just, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't outwork the problem. It was heartbreaking. And it was sort of a very difficult time.
So how did you, I totally relate to that in terms of just wanting to have a plan and be methodical about it. And I personally as well would get frustrated when things don't stick to the plan. That's just a personality trait. Without the kind of additional emotional heartbreak that you must have been also feeling. How did you cope? What coping mechanisms did you have at the time? How effective were they?
the coping mechanism was Julie. There was not. I'd love to stand here talking to you guys, going, and running was my savior. It wasn't at all. Like it really wasn't. And in fact, I think at that point in my life, so just in terms of sort of timeline, the sort of the irony is that I ran my PB in 2013. In 2014, we launched a magazine. I basically crossed the finish line in London, and to run, as a sort of a slightly overweight, relatively old man with no history of running, it took a lot of effort to run that time. So I was regularly running 90-mile weeks, double days, 3 days a week. Like I was putting in a lot of work to achieve that. I crossed the finish line and I thought, I think I just need to take my foot off the pedal, because we've got one fledgling business that we're trying to get going. Now we've just decided to launch another fledgling business on top of that. So I sort of took my foot off the gas, thinking that I would just give myself a year maybe of just maintenance, just running when I felt like it. And then, and that was 10 years ago. I'm embarrassed to say, but the whole, journey that we're talking about came after that decision, to sort of just take my foot off the pedal. And, there wasn't anything, honestly, that got us through it. I can't speak for Julie, but I think it was just that we were, we trusted each other, we love each other, and we were kind to each other, and we just sort of rolled with the punches, and it was a phenomenal learning experience. I made every mistake in the book, and for whatever reason, Julie sort of forgave me, and I tried to learn from those mistakes, and until we reached a point at which we said, okay, that chapter of our life is closed, and now we move on. It's sort of, but running, I said to you, I sort of went into the trough of despair. That was a period of where I would go weeks without going for a run, many weeks without going for a run at all, because I just couldn't be bothered. I just thought, what's the point? What's the point in anything, frankly? So, I don't. The funny thing is, if someone says to me, so how do I get better at being a runner? I like, it's back to this simplicity idea. I'm like, well, here's a whole bunch of things. You should do all these things, and there's not many of them, and you'll get better, probably, almost certainly. If someone says to me, how do we cope with the sort of journey that Julie and I went through? My honest answer is, I don't know. I don't know. Just sort of, I don't know. But that's not a very satisfactory answer, is it?
No.
Sorry.
I'm hearing it's real, and I'm hearing loads in that, and above all, you've found a way of keeping going and making meaning out of it, and doing the other things in life that matter, and moving forward, and that is a triumph as well. And that takes a lot of courage as well, I think. So it's for me, one thing I am a little curious about as well, Simon, is because clearly you've had some difficult moments with running and in your relationship with running. When like your identity is quite tied up with running, though, right? You run this amazing magazine. When I think of you, I'm going to think about running. Does that provoke, like, not being in love with your running personally, does it provoke odd feelings of like guilt, or like I should really be running, or this thing is part of my identity, or is it not like that for you?
No, 100%. I feel I have a photo that I keep visible at all times, and it's me on a run in Boston with a guy called Mario Frioli, who's the chap behind the Morning Shakeout podcast. We are good friends. Mario and I, I'm now honoured to say that we are good friends. And we were both in Boston for the marathon in our capacity as, journalists. And we went on the shakeout run, and someone took a photo and Mario sent it to me. And he looks like the consummate athlete, and I look like I'm having a heart attack. Like and the guilt, the sort of the shame. I was like, oh God, like, what are you doing, mate? that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
I suppose, again, because my passion exists at this intersection of storytelling and running. You don't need to be running 100-mile weeks, smashing out, sub 3 hour marathons, running 100-mile trail races to be a good storyteller or to be in love with storytelling. So the two things, if I sometimes think about kind of a yin and yang symbol, there are times when running is more dominant, or it certainly was when in the run up to me running my PB. Running was, I would say, 90% of my emotional energy. And then it became less, and now it's becoming more. So I always had, I guess, if you fall out of love with running and that's your only connection to running, then it's a problem, because then there's a void. Whereas for me, I was like, well, I can actually become a better editor, a better writer. Again, we started from a position of absolute cluelessness. So my bookshelf is, half full of books about, the dummy's guide to being a magazine editor, because I just had to learn on the job, once we'd started. So I could feel a shameless connection to running because I was working in the story side of things, whilst personally my running was just very much in maintenance mode, if that, at times. But yeah, definitely felt the pressure. And I know lots of people do. I mean, I know lots of people in the running world who, you speak to them and they have a hard time admitting that actually running plays a smaller part in their lives now, because there's always someone who's like, yeah, I'm, the CEO of this multinational corporation. I'm still running 100 miles a week and smashing out a 2:20 marathon. Oh, bloody hell. It's quite, it would probably be a much more difficult situation. In fact, it wouldn't have existed. But had I been in a position where I was trying to give people advice on how to be a runner, I think I would have struggled more with that. Whereas that's not what we do at Like the Wind, so it wasn't really relevant.
Yeah. Hey, and by the way, if you've got the phone number of that CEO who is smashing out a 2:20 marathon, we want him on the podcast, or her on the podcast.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Just
I'll
kidding.
pass it along.
Yeah. You sounds like I had in my mind this kind of U-shaped arc when you talked about your long-term relationship with running. You might be on an uptick and more structure, and you might be working with a coach, I think I gathered. Is that where you are with your running at the moment? Yeah.
Very early into the sort of process. Well, I'm in a good place, but there's something to be said about being in a good place. The whole, the challenges that we've had personally are behind us, and we're sort of on to the next phase in our lives. I mentioned that we'd exited the first business that we launched, so we're now making Like the Wind our full-time. This is when I say our, my wife and I, Julie and I. Like the Wind is now our full-time gig, which I absolutely love. I'm so passionate and excited about it. It's going really well, probably more through luck than anything we've done, but there you go. It's happening. It's great. So I felt like I had the sort of emotional bandwidth to sort of really re-engage with running. But what I realized is that I need accountability, and in business, I have accountability. I have colleagues. We've got thousands and thousands of readers around the world. We have brands that support the magazine. So I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I think is, right, I've got to do my job in order to, deliver for these people that are showing trust in us. If I don't do my job, the magazine won't come out. A lot of people will be annoyed. Staff, colleagues will everyone, readers, colleagues, brands. So I have that accountability, and I don't struggle with putting in the effort with when I have that accountability. In running, the accountability wasn't there. and because nobody cares, nobody gives a toss. And I would give myself a let out too often. I'd be like, you've got a lot to do. Why don't you go tomorrow? It's okay, because nobody cares, and you're not training for anything in particular. So it's okay. So, so I signed up with a coach, and in being completely transparent, I'm on a roll here. I did start working with a counsellor, and it was because I felt a bit sort of adrift, and I thought that might be the solution, and it wasn't. So, if he's listening, this coach is basically taking the place of a psychologist. Everybody knows that, but no pressure. Well, I just realised that what I needed was accountability, and so that's what this guy is creating. Like, I could write down exactly the program that he's setting for me easily. Like, I know I did it for years. I had a coach when I ran my PB for 3 or 4 years up until when I ran my PB, because I got stuck. And I remember sitting with the guy that coached me back in the day, and him saying to me, "What do you need?" And I said, "Well, I just don't understand how to go from where I was, which was I'd probably I had run around about 240, mid 240, 248, something like that. And had this London Championship back in the day when it was a soft target, had this London Championship start in mind. And I didn't know what to do. So I went to find a coach because I thought he would technically tell me how to take that next step. What I realised is that that's not what happened at all. What he provided was accountability. Yeah. Because when that person says, "I want you to run these 400s in whatever time," that's what you do. You don't try and beat the session. You don't try and run it 5 seconds per lap faster. But equally, you don't sort of dawdle and muck about because it's hard. You try and do it. You try and stick to it, or whatever. Yeah. So what my new coach is there for, and he knows this. We've talked about this extensively, and I've known him for like 15 years. Is he's going to give me the accountability that I need to ensure that I, go out every day or whatever is required and, do the work.
Simon, there's something that you're really highlighting to me, which is that it resonates with me, that running is an emotional investment. It gives, but it also takes. You've got a coach as well now in that equation as well to sort of switch that up a little bit. How does that emotional investment point sort of make sense to you, and how is the coach shifting that up for you?
So 100% it does. I think I think where the coach is going to make the biggest difference is that he is going to remove a lot of the overthinking. So, he is supplying me with a training plan, and I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to execute on it until there comes a point where I say to him, actually, there's a problem that I physically can't do it. I think the key thing is I just associate running with positive emotions mainly. Like, it's all good. I love it. There's no bit of running that I don't love. But I do think that when the emotions in all of the other aspects of your life start to pile up, anxiety around the business, stress around personal issues, imposter syndrome, all that other stuff, that can just overwhelm the, I'm by no means an expert in this, but I think it just overwhelm the sort of resilience. And I know that as I get fitter and as we start sort of moving into a period where I start racing again, I will absolutely love it. I've just got to not overthink these situations. And at the moment we've put ourselves, it's all good. We've put ourselves under a lot of pressure from a business perspective. I need to get up in the morning, look at what my coach has written for me and think, right, I'm doing that today. Come hell or high water, I am doing that today, because I'm not going to get on a call with him we have a call every Tuesday, and say, oh, I wasn't able to do that run because, I just felt a little bit meh. That's not, I'm not doing that. There's just no way. So in a way, I think that his job is to almost act as a barrier between my kind of emotions and what needs to be done, the work. It's the same. It goes back to this thing in business. There are days when sometimes you just feel a little bit overwhelmed or a bit stressed out. There's something happening that that is not entirely positive. The people associated with the magazine, to a greater or lesser extent, don't care. If that makes any sense. Of course, they care. They care to a degree, but my job is to, be the editor and the publisher, the person that sort of helps to guide the magazine in the direction of work with the brands that we have as partners and all that sort of stuff. And I don't make excuses to them, because they'll be like, okay, cool, but it's not, I just don't make excuses to them. I just get on with it, whatever it happens to be. I'm not going to make excuses to my coach. His name's Tom. I keep calling him my coach. I'm not going to make excuses to Tom. I'm not going to say to him, like the other day, and he and I have already, in 3 weeks, from a coaching perspective, the rapport is amazing. But I've been noting down, that was an ugly run, but you said do 45 minutes. I did 45 minutes. I didn't do 46 minutes, and I didn't do 44 minutes. But I did exactly, and he's like, his response to that is good. Great. Yeah. That's it. Done. It's just do the work. There's no, I'm sure when we get closer to kind of, I don't know, racing, or when things ramp up a bit, or if I said to him, look, I actually have a real problem. There's something's come up and it's a real issue that I'm struggling with. He would probably give me a lot more feedback. But when I said to him, I didn't sleep very well last night, and I've got a lot on my plate and I'm feeling a bit under pressure, so I just snuck out and did 45 minutes on the treadmill. His response is, good. Great. Done. So I've got like a low emotional situation where we're not sort of, he's not like, oh, how do you feel? He's not, no. Just good. Done. Right. Good. Next. Move on.
Yeah. Providing you what you need, which is valuable. Yeah. Very valuable.
Yeah. It kind of echoes of where we started as well, with that kind of like, well, there's no shortcuts, right? If you don't do it, you won't get to where you want to be. And, and you found that place for the coach to hold you accountable to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to, just as we sort of come into land, just turn back a little bit towards Like the Wind. And you launched a print magazine when people were saying print is dead.
Yep.
What was it about print that made you do that?
I mean, again, I would love to say that there was some master plan. There wasn't. There was the fact that I love books. So it's just driven by, it is truly, I love books. I was subscribed to Rouleur and Surfer's Journal and Climber magazine at a time when I was running 100 miles a week and doing no cycling, no surfing, and no climbing. But I just loved the format. I just thought, this is great. I mean, I'm drawn to these things. I've always loved books. I've always loved analogue. Again, I've never shared this publicly, but when I was at school, so I'm talking about, I was 15, I guess. Me and a friend at school, a guy called Roger, created a magazine. I don't know if that's what magazine is far too grand, but it was called it was called The Tittler, and it was just us kind of writing nonsense about the school, and then photocopying the pages and stapling them together. I think we sold them in the sort of canteen. So I've always loved that sort of, I've always loved that sort of media, printed media. I mean, back then when I was 15, there was no blimmin' internet or social media. So that was media. But I think that sort of always stuck with me. And Julie and I were in a privileged position when we launched the magazine of having another business. So it wasn't like the magazine had to pay the mortgage. It was just, it's what we want for ourselves. And the first issue, we had saved up some money to renovate our kitchen. And I phoned a printer and I said, this is how much I've got. How many copies can I have? And he said, 1,000. And we were like, great, we'll print 1,000.
Wow.
Because we thought, well, I mean, I think if you'd said you can have 100,000, we wouldn't have printed 100,000, by the way. But we thought, well, is there 1,000 people out there who, like us, enjoy the media, the medium of a magazine, are invested enough in running that it's, their lifestyle, and these stories will resonate with them? It's just an experiment. There was no master plan. But as you rightly pointed out, Ed, at the time, everyone was like, you have to be joking. Like, Facebook is taking over the world. No one, everything is online. Everything is online. 2014. You must be mad. But we just thought, well, we'll see. It's our thing. And for years, like for several years, we bankrolled it. As you pointed out, I think, Ed, you said that we didn't have advertising, and that was on purpose because we wanted to create the magazine we wanted to create, right? And we thought, well, if we do 18 months of this, we produce 6 issues. At the point at which we approach brands and say, look, would you like to support it? We don't have to describe the product, and they don't get to tell us how they think they would like to show up. We just hand them 6 copies and go, look, that's what we're doing. We'd love you to support us. You can fit into this, but we're not bending our thing to suit you. Because running media at the time was of a very particular type, very particular style. 10 years later, I still get it. 10 years later, I still get emails from brands or their, PR agencies saying, the new so-and-so shoe is out and it's 235 grams and it's got this and that. And we, let us know if you'd like us to send you a copy, send you a pair for your next product review. Delete. I was like, but
yes.
That's
quite a jarring email, I think, in the context of your publication.
No, it's all right. I mean, I used to. This is, my people pleasing tendencies. I used to email back and say, hey, look, maybe you haven't seen a copy of like the Win magazine. Let me have your address and I'll send you one so that you can see what the magazine looks like. And then maybe if there's a story that would be appropriate, blah, 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 blah. I don't bother now. I just delete it. No. I'm like, if you can't, if the brand is paying you, I don't know, whatever, tens of thousands a month as a retainer, and you can't be bothered to, spend 5 minutes looking at what we do. Yeah. I can't be bothered responding.
I totally hear you. Well, I think you've done the right thing. It is a thing of beauty, the magazine. It's an artifact, and I hear the courage in putting out there what you wanted to put out there, and not bending, and having others, if they want to come on the journey, they can come on the journey.
And now, I really believe this, and this is it's all about timing, right? It's all about sticking around long enough. But I really believe that the pendulum is swinging back. I think people are more interested in analogue stuff, like more interested in. I'm just going to say non-digital. I mentioned that I live in Switzerland now, but I was back in London recently, and I always make a beeline to go to Foyles, and I stood in Foyles. You can sort of stand in the middle of the floor, and there's like a stairwell that kind of spirals up, and I stood in the middle of the floor on a random Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the place was absolutely packed with people buying books, and I was like, this is amazing. This is brilliant, Amazon hasn't killed this off. People are walking through a shop that must weigh hundreds of tons with all the paper in it, and they're picking books up and they're like feeling them in the weight in their hand. And And, the irony is that running is such an analog experience. There's no digital version of running, is there? It's like, can't do it with a VR headset. You've got to go and run. So it's a neat fit, in my opinion. And I think that we're just seeing that people are starting to, and maybe also because I'm getting older, I'm nearly 50, but, the vinyl revival, and people it just feels as though some people are starting to get more attracted to, physical objects, analog things, just wanting a bit of a break from the digital onslaught. And a magazine does that.
Fabulous. Well, you're about to celebrate your 10th birthday, like the wind, 40th issue. I hear there's a party coming up. What does the future look like? What's coming up for Like the Wind?
Well, we're on the march now. It feels as though we've maybe spent 10 years just trying to figure out what this thing is and what we're doing. So we've just welcomed 2 new people to join the team, a US country manager and a US editor. Literally since the beginning of the year, they've both joined in the last few weeks. We launched an issue. We launched Like the Wind Japan last year in October. Wow. With a chap called Kyo Fujishiro, who is a really passionate runner. Drops into 100-mile trail races like it's nothing, but was formerly on the staff at Vogue and Wired and GQ in Japan. So he really knows his stuff. And the big thing for us now is just making more people aware of Like the Wind. I mean, if I could share very quickly an anecdote, I was in Chamonix for the UTMB. We go every year, and my parents wanted to meet my wife and I in Annecy, which is just down the valley from Chamonix, after the whole circus was over for the weekend. So we came down to meet them there, and we were sat in a cafe, and there was a chap sat next to us with his UTMB finishers T-shirt on, and me being me, I had to go and say congratulations. And it turned out he was from the US, and he'd come all the way over to France to race this race. It was a big deal. It was the thing that he was, he'd spent years and years of effort, and I imagine no insignificant amount of money on it. And of course, I always have a copy of the mag, and I handed it to him, and he said, "This is fantastic. Like, I love this. How do I not know about this magazine?" Which is always a slightly depressing question. And by the time, because I'm not very good at my job. And by the time we got back to our apartment, he'd subscribed. And I just need to do that a few tens of thousands of times. That's what we're doing. A lot of time being spent in Annecy in cafes.
Oh, well, that's fabulous. Tracking with Like the Wind from the beginning, and really looking forward to seeing where it goes from here, and tens and thousands more people finding out about it. Just to finish, Simon, where can people find out more about you and what you do and what happens in your life in the next period?
Oh, don't follow me, I'm boring. I would say if anyone has got the time, then likethewindmagazine.com is where you'll find the mag. And I think we're at Like the Wind Mag on all the sort of social channels. That's far more interesting. Other people's stories are better than anything that I'm going to come up with, honestly. We've got some true.
We've just spoken to you for an hour, Simon, and there's absolute gems. So.
Very generous. I'm sure you're going to lose readers as a result, but there you go. You wanted it.
Not at all.
You've been
awesome.
Readers, listen.
Thank you. You've been super generous. You've been incredibly open, and you won't own this when I say it, but I think you've been very wise as well. There's been some incredible stuff. So thank you so much for talking to us on the podcast.
Well, and thank you for putting together such a great podcast, because it's what you're doing, I think, has got a very interesting and unique intersection of running and the other topics that you talk about. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be on the podcast, but also grateful for both of you, Gary and Ed, for putting in the work, because I know it's not easy.
Wow, appreciate that. Thanks, Simon. Well, again, a chance to have a conversation with another amazing person. In this case, someone who I'd maybe never thought I would meet, the man behind Like the Wind magazine. You sort of know there's a human being behind these things, but it's great to meet him and hear about his journey and the journey he's taken with his wife along the way, and everything else that came along. Ed, what stood out for you in the foreground of all of the amazing things that Simon shared?
Well, first off, I just want to really acknowledge the vulnerability. You mentioned his wife, Julie, as well. And I think it was really incredible how open he was and, shared with us the struggles they'd had with fertility. So, I just want to thank him for that. For me, though, the big takeaway was this dedication that he shows, I think. Even right at the beginning of the episode, he was talking about just consistently showing up. And I think, as runners, I guess we kind of know the kind of value of consistency and how, that can build performance over time. But that sense of, there's just no shortcuts, and he finds that in running. So ultimately, if you go out and you build consistency and you train, that's what gets you results. But it's been the same for him in his work life and in publishing this magazine. And, they're on to their 40th issue, 10 years. And, ultimately he's like, he's very, he won't take the credit for what an amazing product it is, but there is also some credit to be taken for the fact that he's still doing it 10 years down the line. Like, it's not like he's got bored and moved on kind of thing. And certainly for me, that would be a very easy thing to do. We've given it a go now, and move on to the next thing kind of thing. And I found it really interesting, that kind of comparison that he draws between, like, I can go out, consistently train, there's no shortcuts, but I can also go out and consistently publish a magazine. And it's got better over time as well. Like, he even said the first episode was rubbish. The first episode, the first issue. And it wasn't. But it's even better now. So, I found that pretty cool to reflect on.
And in the sort of context of this podcast, he said he didn't have a kind of pattern of sticking with things until he started sticking with his running, right? And then that has had, maybe not totally directly, it didn't emerge, but it's clearly part of his identity now. He is someone who can grittily show up and keep going and churn out the consistency. I really, really love that sort of feedback from running into life. That was great.
Yeah, really nice life lesson. What about you, Jenny? What stood out for you?
I think one thing that really stood out to me was, like, the more you put in, the more you get out. And I think that's kind of obvious in all areas of his life. The one story that really tickled me was the Christmas when he, or the time when it was snowing and he had to go out and get his 20-mile run done. And he was doing it up and down the road, and he was giving himself a massive pat on the back about it, and then going to talk to his fellow, club runners, and then just telling him it's a normal thing to do in the snow. And that was very relatable to me, and I think probably to a lot of our listeners as well. And I think it kind of links back to that: the more you put in, the more you get out of it. And skipping that would have maybe cost him the marathon at the end of the day. So it was important to get it done.
Yeah. It's such a fair deal running, isn't it? It's not always fair, because sometimes you get injured maybe and other things happen, but generally it's a fair deal. If you do the work, you get the results, which I love that.
Absolutely. And I think, you can then draw on that in all areas of your life, like he's done with his 2 businesses and the magazine and everything. So, I think the result he's got now is a pat on the back for all the time and effort he's put into it.
Totally agree. The thing that stood out for me, I'll just throw in, is you heard me ask a question there maybe about his identity, and he's clearly running less than I had perceived he had been running over the last few years. And that's maybe me like thinking, Simon's got to be Mr. Running, right? So he's got to be running all the time and he's always got to be loving it. And actually he hasn't been running that much, but also, as we talked about, that's not like led to like an identity crisis for him. He casts his identity much more broadly. There's other things that running means to him. There are other things going on in his life. And I was like, you could probably hear in my question as well, I'm running a little bit less than I used to. And that's definitely caused me some I used to think of myself fully as a runner. Now I'm spending more time on the bike. Like, what does that mean? Because, the biking and the running community, they don't talk to each other, right? So I really like that. I took that from him. Like, let's just, cast your identity as widely as you can. And we've talked about that a couple of times on this podcast, I think, and it helps you out when things aren't going brilliantly in one area of your life. I love that. I did like that.
Yeah, he was very self-aware as well, wasn't he? It's like he's got this coach now, and he's aware of why he has the coach. Because he needs the accountability, and and is really pushing into that, like not doing a minute less, but also not doing a minute more. Yeah,
I really like that, actually. I'm, as someone who can't help doing more than a minute more occasionally, I was like, it's so good. Go on, Jenny.
It's got you overachieving as well as underachieving, really, isn't it?
It's just brilliant to be let into someone else's world and go, yeah, actually it is possible just to do the plan as it's prescribed and not try and do more. And that's really valuable.
Gives me goosebumps hearing that.
Yeah. Well, completely. Well, Jen, we're going to come to you for thinking about what we'd like the audience to kind of go away and do and think about. And I think it might be in that space of what you put in, you get out, and something related to that.
Yeah, definitely. I think a really good kind of go do right now would be to take a moment to reflect on a time when you showed up and kept putting in the work, even when, it could have got really tough and the results have been way better than you expected. Personally, for me, last year, like I kept showing up, I kept racing, and I kept underperforming to my own personal standards. And it took me a year of just turning up, grinding every day to kind of come away with a really good result this year and run a time I'm really proud of. So, I have evidence and proof that it does work.
Yeah, that's valuable. And there's so much at stake for you with your running, and just having the faith to keep turning up, believing, hoping that the result's going to show up down the line. I think that's beautiful. So we're asking the audience to have their own moment of reflection where they've just grittily shown up. Think about whatever it is in your lives where you've shown up and you've got an outcome and you've gone like, wow, that's just a result of me putting in the work and sticking around, as Simon talked about it.
I think as well, it was tough for you, Jenny, wasn't it? Like the last 18 months or so. And there may be people who are in that space right now of, they are continuing to show up and they haven't seen the kind of redemption arc, the conclusion of the story yet. And, I just want to encourage people that you can still reflect on that, and you still know that it will, even if it hasn't yet, it will. And so don't dwell in the depths of despair.
Definitely. And there's a fantastic image that I have, or I've seen various times, with someone kind of digging a hole or digging a tunnel, and it's what they're seeing, and then the other side is so close to kind of the success, as you say, and they kind of just turn around before they get there because they've been trying for so long and they've given up. So I think if you can picture something like that when you're kind of thinking about this, it might help you.
Love it.
That's awesome.
Thanks so much for listening to the Run Alive podcast. If you really enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or a colleague so we can reach more people. And the best way to do this is through personal recommendations.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're at run_alive on Instagram. You can also find us on LinkedIn, X, and TikTok.